Hey, all right. As Marcus said, my name is Pete Campbell. I am one of the new pastors on staff here. Been here going on 8 weeks today, and it's been. First of all, I want to say, thank you to all of you who have opened up your arms and your hearts to me. And I'm so excited because this past Wednesday, after 7.5 weeks of being away from my family, I got to see my wife and kids, and they're actually here today. And so my wife Sarah's over there, and she can throw her hands up. She's like, I'm not standing because she's like, don't put me on the spot. So, but I want to say I've been really looking forward to this opportunity to be able to share God's Word with you. Every single week when we come together, when we gather together as a church, as the body of Christ, and we get into God's Word, it's my expectation, God, whatever is being spoken from this stage, may it not just be the words of who are speaking it, but God, may it really be you. And so, today, as what Marcus said, we are continuing our series. You asked for it. And last week, Pastor Marcus talked with us about what to do when I'm not okay. And I don't know about you, but in my season of life, with being separated from my family and different things for so many weeks, man, there was lots of areas in my own heart where it's just like, God, I'm not feeling it. I know what to do. I know what you're asking of me, but you go through those moments. And that message last week was it was life-changing. And I believe it was the same way as it was for me, it was for you. And I want you guys to think about this. None of us are perfect. We all struggle with doubt. We all have insecurities. We all deal with anger. A lot of us, we've got brokenness in our lives. A lot of us, we have hurt. The list can go on and on and on. And in that, there was a point in time in my own life where I always thought that I had to have everything together, that I had to have all of my ducks in a row, that I always had to have, this perfect presentation that I gave to God so that I could approach Him and then say, hey, God, this is where I'm not cool. This is where I'm struggling. But in reality, I realize that the older and older that I get, the more that I walk in this journey with Christ, I realize that, maybe God's presence is powerful when I'm just completely honest in whatever I'm struggling with. So no matter what you're going through, God will always provide what you need when you need it. Notice that I didn't say that God will always provide what you want. Not only will God meet you where you are, but He loves you so much that He's not going to just leave you there. If we look at Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, it says this, and it'll be up on your screen. It'll say that He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ's return. So in this series of questions, many of you wanted to talk about the struggle, this whole idea of forgiveness. And the two big questions, we asked are, how do I forgive others and how do I forgive myself? Especially when it maybe comes to your past, when it comes to the relationships that you're in now, or maybe from the relationships of old. Maybe it's what you've done, or maybe for some of you, you've kind of you've been a victim, and so maybe of certain things that have been done to you. So today we're going to look at forgiveness, and we're actually going to look at Jesus Christ and the model that He showed us in His own life of how do we deal with forgiveness. And so we're going to look at Luke chapter 23, verse 34. And this is shortly after Jesus was persecuted and after He went down the road, for the crucifixion, and they're hanging Him on the cross. And all of a sudden He says this simple statement while they've already hung Him on the cross, and He says this, and it says, Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. Not what they did, but while they were doing it, Jesus forgave them. He forgave them. He willingly gave His own life on the cross for everyone who ever lived, including me and you. Which means that Jesus was saying that He loved you so much and He loved me so much that He was asking God to spare us all the judgment that we deserved. So remember what all has transpired up until this particular moment from this one verse that we just read. Jesus being hanged on the cross, first of all, He was betrayed by one of His closest disciples, someone that He lived life with for over 3 years, right? He was arrested, and then He was placed on trial, and then not only just placed on trial, but He was falsely accused. Things were said about Him that didn't even describe who He really was and how He really lived. And then Peter. one of his closest disciples, denied him. Said that, I didn't even know this man, this Jesus. Who are you talking about? And he denied him. He was beaten, he was whipped, and he was sentenced to death while being mocked by those who once shouted his praise, once shouted his name with joy and happiness when he came into the city. See, if we were in this position, if we were in Jesus' position, I doubt that many of us in this room today would respond in the same manner. Right? Or am I the only one? Or everybody? Right? I mean, I can be honest with you. I don't think that, oh man, God, please forgive them. Like that would totally be the first thing that came across my mind. Right? And so Jesus really stood by what he said. You know, he spoke of things like, love your enemies, praying for those who persecute you. All of the things that totally seem upside down to our world and our culture today, doesn't it? To love your enemies, to pray for those who persecute you. But that's what Jesus still does today. This very moment, this very instant that all of us are sitting in this room, He's a God who loves, He's a God who forgives. No matter what we've done, His grace is for all of us in this room. I want you to tell your neighbor today, grace is for you. Come on, tell your neighbor today, say, God's grace is for you. Come on, wake up a little bit. Say, God's grace is for you. You know, I want you to think for a moment, every spiritual journey starts with realizing that we need forgiveness. You know, if you want to even get to a place to even get this whole thing started about what it truly means to be in a relationship with God, the first thing is the recognition that, man, all of us need forgiveness. Our journey with Christ, our journey with God starts when we realize that we need it. That we don't just want it, that we can't just have it, but we really need it. In order for life, in order for hope, in order for a new life to begin, we need God's forgiveness. You know, there's nothing that we can do on our own strength in order to make ourselves right with God. And I know that if I'm like any of you out there, I've had my days where I felt like I put my best foot forward and I really knocked it out of the park, and I still came up short. We can't get rid of our sin, the stuff that separates us from God, our choices, our selfishness. But the only thing that we can do is receive the forgiveness that Jesus offers. You know, we ask Jesus to forgive us, and then we allow Him to work in us and through our lives. Forgiveness may be a starting point, maybe a starting line, but it doesn't end there. So when we accept God's forgiveness, it's not just a start and, all right, sweet, that's it. Because what happens? We all mess up. Other people will hurt us, and we'll want to one-up them and get them right back, right? But because of Jesus' example, He tells us that we need to offer that same forgiveness that we received in return to others as well. And so when you think about this whole idea of forgiveness, and you think about what Jesus modeled on the cross, right? How He willingly gave of Himself, that He gave His life for all of us, for the people there at that moment, and for all of us who are here today, and for those to come. He gave of Himself, and He willingly asked God to forgive those. And then you come to a point where shortly after that moment has happened, right? Jesus' body is taken off of the cross. His body is then prepared, right? And then what happens? They put Him in a tomb. You know, this is some of the stuff that we talked about from Easter Sunday. And they put His body in the tomb, and then 3 days later, after His body's in the tomb, all of His disciples, I mean, they're walking around defeated. They're walking around thinking like, you know, Jesus said all of these things. He promised all of this stuff, and now here we are without our King. Here we are without our shepherd, our master, right? And He told us all of these different things, but, you know, when we're going through the rough times, when we're going through the hard stuff sometimes, we tend to forget all of the promises. We tend to forget, you know, all of the truth to help us to really endure, to help us to move forward, to persevere. And so we jump into John 20, 24 through 27, and I'm going to read these verses for you, and this is all going to come together, and I'll show you how. So it says here, now Thomas, also known as Didymus, Thomas Aramaic and Didymus Greek, both mean twin, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, what does he say? I will not believe. So then a week later, I mean, imagine everything that transpires in a given week, right? A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and this time Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came in. I love this for a moment. Think about this. The doors were locked, and then Jesus busts into the house. It's like ultimate locksmith. Like, I mean, that guy, right? So Jesus walks into the house, and he stood among them, and he said, what? Peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out to your side, or reach out and put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe, Thomas said to him. My Lord and my God. Then Jesus told him, because you have seen me and you have believed, blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed. You know, Jesus came and appeared to his disciples again, and he showed his disciples his scars. You know, the place where he was nailed, the place where he was pierced in his side. And I want you to think about this for a moment. In your life, in all of the decisions and all of the things that you've had to go through to lead to this very moment today, to even walking into this place, where have you been wounded? What kind of things have really damaged maybe your heart, your mind, your soul? You know, where are the scars in your life? You know, the disciples, they had to see something in order to know what he went through, right? They had to see Jesus physically, and Jesus showed them his scars so that they really knew, like, this is what God went through. This is what Jesus went through. But not only did he go through it, but he overcame it. And now, because of him overcoming the sin and overcoming and all those different things that God had brought new life, they saw his scars and they saw that Jesus is telling him, you know what? You're not defined by those wounds. But there's something that can come out of those scars in your own life, because there's new life that comes from mine. Many of us, we try to prove God's presence by our successes, especially if you've got that doer personality, especially if you feel like you've got to accomplish certain things in order to have a sense of purpose. You know, we try to prove that God is really with us, or that God loves us and that he exists by all of our good things. By all of the things, all of the monuments, all of the stuff that we build up, all of the pictures that we post on social media to say, like, this is my life, everything is great, right? But in reality, living out a life of forgiveness, it's not about covering up what you've been through in order to pretend like you're perfect. I want you to hear that. Living out forgiveness in your life and all of the things that you've gone through, it's not about covering what you've been through in order to pretend like you're perfect. You know, Jesus didn't come to cover the pain, but to show his strength in your weakness. Jesus didn't come for you or for me to cover the pain, but to show his strength in our weakness. You know, we all struggle. And if we level the playing field and say right here, right now, you know, even as myself, Pete, hey, I'm 34 years old. I've been in the ministry for over 12 years as a pastor and different things. And a lot of people think, oh man, when they hear that you're a pastor, you know, they automatically put you on this pedestal. Knock me down. I'll throw myself off. Right? We all struggle. We've all been wounded. We all have stories and situations and things that have happened to us, or maybe things that we've said with our very mouth that we would sure love to forget. But a lot of times, God brings us to a place where we sit and we wonder, God, what are you doing? And did you know that there are a lot of times in life, in this journey, that God will leave you in a place where you don't understand, so that he can create faith in your heart? So maybe you are dealing with some wounds today. Maybe people have said some hurtful things to you. Maybe there have been some actions, there have been some situations that have happened in your life, maybe from those who you trusted, those who are closest to you. And you're wrestling with those wounds. You're wrestling with that spirit of unforgiveness in your life. And you're wondering, why do I wrestle with this? Why do I struggle? Maybe why is it that I feel like I go through a cycle and I feel like I've gotten victory, but then all of a sudden, man, here it is, just knocking on my door, and I feel like crap again. Maybe it's in those moments that God is saying, if you would just put your faith in me, if you would just trust in me, I'll give you the faith. I'll give you the courage. I'll give you the strength to persevere, to hold on. Put your finger where the sin was. Put your finger where the shame was. Just like those nails that were placed in Christ's hands and His feet. They didn't hold Him on that cross. What held you or what is holding you today doesn't have to hold you anymore. Freedom can be yours. All you have to do is to accept it. Say, God, here I am, plain old me. It's yours. Jesus didn't show Thomas his wounds, but He showed him his scars. And I want you to think for a moment, there's a big difference between wounds and scars. Because here's the truth. For a lot of you, you don't know my story. You don't know, about where I came from and all those different things. But I was born in Honolulu, Hawaii. And so this is the closest that I've been to it since I was 10 years old, man. And it feels so good, right? But I grew up in Honolulu, Hawaii, with a single mom, single parent. And at the age of 2, my real dad, who I don't know anything about, don't even know what he looks like. I just know that I have his name because I'm a junior. Okay? My real father left when I was 2 years old. And so, not by my choosing, not by my choice, here I am thrust into this new life now of being fatherless. And I remember as an elementary school kid growing up, and I see all of these parallels and these different things in my son who is 7. And I remember as a little kid, cherishing and having this burning desire to have a family. To not just have a mom, but to have a dad. Oh man, to have siblings, that would have been awesome. Someone I could pick on, right? Someone I can make do what I want, kind of be like little boss man, right? And all these different things. And I remember going through all this stuff and thinking of all these different things. Well, one day, God, one day I'm going to have a family. One day life is going to be what I imagine it. Life is going to be like all of those movies that I watch, all of those fairy tales and different things that I see. And then I remember, at like 7 years old, my mom meets a guy. And first thing I do, they start dating and then they move in. And guess what? I just start calling him Dad. Because I was that desperate. I'm being honest. I was that desperate to have a man in my life that I could look up to. And so, going through all of those different things, they had their own struggles, with alcoholism. My dad, right, was also addicted to cocaine. And this was back in the days where you could strap cocaine to your body and get on an airplane and go here and there and bring stuff. Yeah, you can't do anything like that now, right? Thank God, right? And all of those different things. And I remember, so at that time, thinking, things are turning out. Stuff is starting to feel like it. Even when my family was dysfunctional, even when I would come home to our single-bedroom apartment as a little kid from school, and then all of a sudden my dad would get home, and next thing you know, he's plastered. He is drunk out of his mind, and they're screaming and yelling. And, of course, being in a single-bedroom home, the only place I could hide was in the closet. And so I'm listening to everything, the shouting and the screaming and the broken glass and all this different stuff. And I was like, well, at least I have a dad. This may not seem completely perfect. This may not seem like the images or the my imagination and how I dreamed of things being, but I've got a family. And then lo and behold, at 10 years old, we picked up everything that we had and moved from Hawaii, from Hawaiian paradise to Amish paradise in Pennsylvania. And it was crazy, to follow my dad. And I remember the first time I saw snow, I was the stupid kid who didn't know anything, and I went out there in shorts and a t-shirt because I woke up and there was this white stuff on the ground and I had never physically seen it in my life, and I just went out there and I was like, yeah, right? Throwing myself out there, trying to do whatever, the snow angels and all that stuff, and then my mom, short little 4'8", Asian woman, get back in here, Pete, and all these different things, and it was like just yelling at me and getting ready to whoop me up one side because, I was outside in the snow and not dressed for it. She's like, you're going to get cold. And at 10, after we made this giant move, then my family got married. My wife, or my mom, wow, that would have been weird, right? My mom got married, and I really felt like, okay, things are turning a new leaf. They were getting free from their alcohol. They were getting free from the drugs. I felt like things were going to be good. But then 2 years later, divorce. And it sent my life in a huge tailspin. To a point now where I'm, 12 years old, and I'm starting to really wonder and figure out, what does it mean to really be a man? What does it mean for all of this crazy stuff that's going on? And I started looking in myself and wondering, well, maybe it's my fault. Maybe it's my own doing. I chased him away. And at 16 years old, I came to know Christ. I gave my heart to Him. And I'm thankful for God's forgiveness in my own life, because in that whole tailspin of that year or so, man, I pushed my mom away. I did things that I wasn't supposed to. I made bad choices, got involved with the wrong people. But God's grace kept me. I didn't know anything about Him, but God's grace kept me. Just like you may not know really anything about who God is and all those things, but guess what? God's grace will keep you. Because He loves you, because He offers forgiveness for you, because He wants to see a new beginning for you. And it was the same thing for me. And I remember, I thought I overcame that. I thought I had forgiven, my stepdad. I thought I had forgiven my real dad. But it wasn't until a little over 7 years ago when I found out that my wife and I were pregnant with our first child. And it felt like everything hit. That I was in the storm. And I was like, man, I know who God is. I'm a pastor. I've been in ministry for a while now. But I started wrestling with all these insecurities and all these doubts, and this unforgiveness started to rise up in my heart, and I was like, I thought I'd made it past it. And then I started second guessing myself and who God called me to be as the man of my house. And I was wondering, man, am I going to be a good father to my own kid? It rocked my world. And then God brought me to a place, and He showed me that, in life, things are going to happen. You're going to get wounded. But when it comes to forgiveness, especially for things that have been inflicted upon you that weren't your choice, life becomes a whole lot easier when you learn to accept an apology that you never got. So maybe for some of you, you never heard those words, I'm sorry. You've never heard those words like, it was my fault, forgive me. You've never heard those words. But man, if you accept Christ's forgiveness, if you accept God into your life, God will do a work in your life and get into the nitty-gritty of who you are, and you'll find yourself getting to a place where you're like, I've never been accepted. I've never accepted an apology. I never actually got one, but God, I forgive him. I forgive him. Whatever has wounded you, whatever you hide, many of us, we choose to walk around like we're wounded. Have you ever met somebody who walked around like, they had a chip on their shoulder, like everything was just, right? Just messed up. It's like, man, what side of the bed? Did you even wake up on a bed? Right? All of those different things. And so many of us, we choose to walk around wounded. We choose to have a negative attitude, bringing our pain, our experiences, and just dumping it all onto somebody else's life. Why? Because that's all we know. You're right? Hurt people. Some of us, we've been so wounded that, when you've ever gotten a cut or you've been wounded someplace and you touch it, oh man, it's still sensitive. right? It still hurts. We're still sensitive to what hurts us. You know, in the end of 2014, I was helping some friends at their house. They were putting some new flooring in, and I've done some flooring work. You know, I'm not a master of all trade, definitely not. I know at least I know my way around. So I thought, and I started doing some flooring and cutting around some of the subfloors, trying to get up some of the old siding, some of the old floorboards and different things at this friend's house. And I'm using this saw that I've used before, so no one else had used it. And if you guys have ever, had to use saws or, electrical equipment, different things like that, construction stuff, if you've never used one, maybe there's a little sense of, ugh, right? And so all of my friends were like, well, I've used it, so here, let me do it. I've done it before. I did it at my last house. So I'm here using this tool, and next thing you know, as I'm going around the subfloor, right along the baseboards, cutting along with this circular saw with teeth the size of jaws, is what it feels like, I hit a knot in the subfloor. Next thing you know, this saw that I'm holding just pops up. I have gloves on. I had 2 hands on it. I wasn't being careless, okay, right? Here's what not to do, right? No, I was doing everything that I knew that I was supposed to for safety. And next thing you know, the saw kicks up, spins around, whips around, and I'm like, ooh, ouch. And all of a sudden, blood starts to pour out from the saw because it had wrapped itself around my finger. And it happened so fast and so quick. And for most of you guys, as you can tell, I play guitar, right? And we're talking about my wedding ring finger, right? I'm not giving you the bird. We're good, okay? Right? But my ring finger was caught and completely hanging by just a little bit of skin. I'm sorry if this is grossing you out. I have pictures and I didn't put them up because I thought about you, all right? If you want to see them, I love to show them. It's really sweet. Right? But so immediately, some of the thoughts that popped through my mind, I was like, oh my gosh, am I ever going to play again? All these different thoughts raced through my mind, and then I felt God give me peace. And then, we get to the hospital, go through the whole process of watching 8 to 10, people that work at the hospital, even the janitor come out, and they're all trying to rip this saw off my finger that's still in it. Hilarious. My wife explains it, and I still remember part of it because I was kind of drugged a little bit. But, after all that, and then going into the surgery and initially thinking I'm probably never going to have any use of this finger again. I shouldn't have any feeling. I shouldn't have anything. I really shouldn't have had a finger. Because whenever they actually took the saw off, I remember the doctor just, kind of just placing it and wrapping it up real quick and all that different stuff. And I tell you this because I had this thing in a cast and in the stitches for over a month. Not getting it wet, walking around feeling weird everywhere I went, because I've got this huge bandage that's just wrapped around. And people are like, what happened to you? I was playing with saws and the saw wand, whatever. And I remember thinking finally when they took it off and I started looking at it and I started seeing all of the stitches and just how the finger just looked so nasty. And I remember thinking, I am going to play again. I am going to play again. And for some of us, we've been really, really wounded. And for a lot of us, sometimes we stay wounded. When in reality, I said, you know what? I want to play again, so I can't just stay wounded, but I've got to get myself into a process. I've got to get myself some rehab so that I can start getting some feeling back, so I can start being able to use my finger again. But it took work. It took sacrifice. There was a lot of pain. There were times where I really felt like this is not going to happen. But then I just stuck to it, and I remember what God told me. And I pushed through it. And no longer did this become a wound that I carried around in my whole life, but it became a scar. And when I look at this scar, I still get tingles like crazy. When it's wintertime, back where I was from in Indiana, when it got super cold, my arthritis and my whole finger just was stiff as a board, and I couldn't move it. But I look at it today, and I look at the scar. It gives me hope. A hope that shows me that I can do it, that I can make it, that I'm not alone, that God is with me, and that He still chooses to use me. I almost wanted to quit, but I didn't. I had a lot of fears, but through Christ I overcame them. Forgiveness doesn't mean that it didn't happen. We all hear that phrase, forgive and forget. That's something, if we're completely honest, we'll never be able to do. But then, isn't that denial? No. It's not saying that things didn't happen. It's not about blaming other people. Forgiveness, in all reality, is not about forgetting, but it's about letting go of the pain. Letting go of the hurt. Letting go of the past. Realizing that in Jesus Christ, there is so much more. We can all think of those situations and the people that have wounded us. But the hardest person that you will ever have to forgive is yourself. It happened. The memory, it's there in your head. Right? It's all in our complex minds. It's there. Whether it's abuse, whether it's being lied to, whether it's been, taken advantage of, broken trust, all of those different things. It's there. It happened. It hurts. Sometimes we think that forgiveness is a feeling, but it's not a feeling. It's a choice. It's a choice that each and every single one of us have to make. A choice that has faith to believe that the same place you've been wounded is now a place where your healing is. See, your greatest strength will come from your greatest weakness. So not only have you and not only have I been wounded, but I know that we've wounded others too. We've hurt others. Maybe by our choices, by our words. We can't ask to receive God's forgiveness and His grace when we refuse to give other people theirs. See, Jesus showed Thomas that what held him doesn't hold him anymore. All of the hurts, all of the pain, the struggles, our past, they were hung on that cross. And you can leave them there. And you can let them go. See, to be free means that you've got to let go. It's hard to be free. It's hard to have full motion when you're holding on to stuff and carrying things that are weighing you down. There will be things that need to happen. Changes that will need to be made. And for a lot of us, it's not that we wanted it to happen, right? But it did. So my scars, your scars, when we look at them, they're proof of God's power. They're proof of His love. So how do I live forgiveness out in my life? First one is that I choose. I choose to forgive. I choose to live it out. Even if every fiber in my being wants to show how I'm better. Right? Even with every fiber of my being wants to show, man, payback would be so awesome right now. Because it feels good. Right? Some of you are looking at me like, come on. No. It does. Right? Because the thoughts sure come across my mind sometimes. I'm like, ooh, nah, can't. Forgiveness is a choice. One of the other things that I do sometimes is I journal. Not to say that I've got some, pink-bound book with leather wraps with sparkles and little, glittery bookmarks coming out. No. Right? Just talking about something where I write it out, I write out what I'm feeling, I write out what I'm thinking. As I go through God's Word, as I read through the Bible, I'll write out different things and just express it from my heart. Sometimes it's good to speak it out. Sometimes it's really good to just write it out. Because it's kind of like a sense of release. You're doing something to just let it go. The third thing I do is I pray. I'm often doing something, like I said before, as a symbol of just releasing it. Sometimes I'll walk around and I'll say, God, and I'll just have my hands out, palms up. God, I give it to you. Sitting there in my prayer and I surrender it, God. It's yours. Help me. Give me the willingness to forgive. Give me the strength to choose to forgive. Then the fourth thing is I bring my thoughts into captivity. You know, 2 Corinthians 10:5 says that we take captive, I love this, we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. You know, every single thought, every single emotion, right? We got to keep those things in check, and we say, man, what does God say? What does God's word say about it? What do I know the character of Jesus and who he is? Does that really match up with it? And if it doesn't, then, man, you wrap that thing up, you kick it out to the curb, you do whatever you need to. Because it's a battle for your life. It's a battle for your character. It's a battle for who you are. And then I also pray that God would bless those who have wounded me. I pray for them. Matthew 5:44 in the Message says, I'm telling you to love your enemies, to let them bring out the best in you. What? Did I read that right? Right? To love your enemies and to let them bring out the best in you, not your worst. So when I pray for them, I don't pray that God would, knock them out with the next, whatever it is that comes along and just takes them out of this world. But I pray for God's blessing. I pray for God to show himself to them. And to be honest with you, that prayer, it's really for my own good, not just the person that I'm praying for. How long do we want to stay wounded in our life? Maybe for some of you today, what do you have to let go of today? Because like I said earlier, all things work together for the good of those who love him. For those who call Jesus their friend. For those who say, God, my life is yours.